an Australian politician staged a foul-mouthed protest at a royal reception attended by the King and Queen today. Dressed in a native fur coat, Green Senator Lydia Thorpe, 51, shouted that the monarch had committed genocide against our people and added, "F the colony." After speeches in Parliament House by the King, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Leader of the Opposition Peter Dutton, the independent senator from Victoria walked down the aisle of the Great Hall shouting, "You committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back. Give us what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land? Give us a treaty. We want a treaty." As security guards began to usher Thorpe away, she became more animated and continued to shout, "This is not your land. This is not your land. You are not my king. You are not my king." Buckingham Palace declined to comment on Thorpe's outburst in Parliament House, but sources brushed off the lone protester, saying their majesties were deeply touched at the warmth of the welcome they had received throughout the day. The King and Queen, who were still seated on the stage during the confrontation, appeared to take no notice as the King turned to speak to the Prime Minister and Camilla turned towards his wife. They were seen laughing off the politician's heckling and were said to be unruffled by the tirade, which they hoped would not overshadow what had been an otherwise wonderful day. Before her outburst, she had turned her back as the Australian anthem was played. Earlier in the day, Senator Thorpe appeared close to being arrested while protesting the visit of the King and Queen Camilla to Canberra. A confrontation with police took place at an Indigenous protest outside the Australian War Memorial. A group of some 24 Indigenous protesters positioned themselves outside the memorial, chanting always will be Aboriginal land. The group was well away from where the King and Queen appeared. Senator Thorpe was seen arguing with a police officer who held onto her shirt. She then pulled her shirt off and stormed away from the cop. "Everything that we suffer in this country is because of that colonial invasion," Senator Thorpe said after the tussle. The reception in the Australian Parliament had started with a welcome procession, as a didgeridoo announced their Majesties' arrival into the Great Hall at Parliament House. They received a formal welcome to Ngunnawal country by Senior Ngunnawal Elder Auntie Violet Sheridan. After speeches from the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Leader of the Opposition Peter Dutton, Charles spoke of his affection for Australia. In an address which lasted a little over 10 minutes, the King acknowledged the timeless wisdom of Indigenous people and spoke of his formative time at Geelong Grammar School, saying, "I had thought that the school I had been attending in Scotland was remote and testing enough. But nothing had quite prepared me for the realities of the bush country." The King said, "I arrived as an adolescent and left as a more rounded, if not even somewhat chiseled character once I had contended with brown snakes, leeches, funnel web spiders, and bull ants. And bearing in mind this was very nearly 60 years ago, been given certain unmentionable parts of a bull calf to eat form a branding fire in outback Queensland." It was after the King had returned to his seat that Thorpe broke free from the area where she had been standing. Speaking before the reception, Thorpe had warned of such an outburst, saying, "I'm going to tell him he's not my king. He's not our king. All of the wealth that he has created for his family has been stolen. He should apologize for taking our land. We need a peace treaty." Until the protest, the event had been calm and quiet, with dignitaries listening in silence to the speeches. Before the King spoke, the Prime Minister had given a warm address, describing the late Queen as a shining thread through the history of Australia. He then told Charles, "Since your first visit in 1966, you have been taken into Australian hearts just as you have taken us into yours. You have known the great natural beauty of this continent in all its challenge and all its reward. You have known the warmth, strength, and humor of our people. And what has grown out of your appreciation of all of this is an affection that flows both ways." Albanese recalled the King's Australian educational experiences, ranging from your time at Timbertop to your time at the Countdown studio being interviewed by Molly Meldrum. Both, in their own ways, deeply formative experiences. The leader of the opposition party, Peter Dutton, used his speech to poke fun at the Republican Labour government during the royal visit, joking people have had haircuts, people have shined shoes, shirts have been pressed, and that's just the Republicans. Parliament House in Canberra is often described as the heart of Australian democracy and is one of the most open parliament buildings in the world. Afterwards, the king and queen walked out into the foyer of the building to huge applause, including school children waving flags. Outside, they took part in a traditional royal walkabout, now called an opportunity to meet the public. Sarah Rimmer, 34, and Nicholas Hicks, 29, now live in Australia but are originally from Southport, UK. Hicks said, "I said thank you for the king for going to Southport after the attack in July, and he said that he was pleased he could go and that the people there were very resilient." Jackie Stewart, 52, from Brisbane, told the king that she had once had a gin and tonic with him during a parliamentary reception that her husband, who was serving in the military, had been invited to in the mid-1990s. She said he had a gin and tonic, and it is a very nice memory, so I reminded him when we met. Despite the outburst, King Charles and Queen Camilla received the warmest of welcomes on their first full day of engagements in Australia, from the sun that finally came out to the crowds on the streets. Handed armfuls of flowers, toy koalas, and even some kangaroo jerky, the couple were repeatedly thanked for making the long journey over, particularly in light of His Majesty's ongoing cancer treatment. Arriving at St. Thomas Anglican Church in North Sydney in the morning, the royal duo, who enjoyed a down day yesterday after their grueling flight, were met with loud cheers from the hundreds of well-wishers, rounding out a handful of protesters with a decolonized banner calling for Indigenous rights and waving Palestinian and Lebanese flags. A handful of locals shouted, "Get lost and get a life," in frustration, while one man told them, "Be thankful you live in a free society where you can argue across the street." Fans waiting inside the church grounds, including dozens of Sunday school children, were thrilled to shake hands with the king and queen, while others described the ongoing Republican debate as a bore. Afterwards, one child delightedly shouted, "I touched the king, it was so good. He was so kind," said another little girl. A palace source said their majesties were deeply touched by seeing and hearing the very many thousands who'd turned out to support them, and are only sorry they didn't have a chance to stop and talk to every single one. The warmth and scale of the reception was truly awesome. While they are grateful to all the crowds, their majesties particularly enjoyed hearing individual stories of those who'd made such a special effort to be there. The couple went on a planned meet and greet outside the Parliament building, but it only lasted a few minutes despite the many hundreds who had turned out for a glimpse of them. Many said they had queued from 8 a.m. in blistering heat, and some had even flown in from other cities, including Cairns, in order to pay their respects. Sources said that sadly, despite the king and queen's best endeavors, not everyone could be greeted in person. They emphasized the couple were very grateful for all the support they had received. The scale and warmth of welcome from very many thousands at both venues was a truer indicator of the mood of the day than a lone noisy protester, they said. Earlier, the king and queen arrived in Canberra on a Royal Australian Air Force jet to be greeted with a welcome to country and smoking ceremony. Auntie Serena Williams and Robert Palm officiated over the smoking ceremony on behalf of the Ngunnawal community. The traditional gesture burns native plants. Palm, 49, lit leaves as part of the traditional ceremony, and the king and queen were encouraged to waft the smoke towards them with their hands. Palm said they smiled and said it was really nice. They were wafting the smoke towards them to clear the passage so they can have a good journey in this land. It takes away bad spirits. They will sleep like babies tonight because it has eucalyptus leaves and lemongrass leaf. We knew because of his cancer we wanted to make it really nice and fragrant. After being greeted by officials, they met school children Ruby, 11, and Louis Core, 12, pupils from nearby Bonnython Primary School, which was opened by the late Queen in 1992. Louis described the meeting, for which he had been selected at random by his teachers, as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They were also greeted by wheelchair-bound Indigo Young, 11, from Cranley School. Thorpe has a history of stunts, including slamming the late Queen as a colonizer and calling her genocidal despite declaring that she was not going to come out ranting and raving after the monarch's death. She was elected as member of the Greens but quit the party in February last year over disagreements concerning the proposed Indigenous voice to Parliament. Now sitting as an independent, she has been an outspoken critic of the monarchy and Britain's arrival on the Australian continent in 1788. In a statement released on Monday, Senator Thorpe said the British Crown and King Charles should be prosecuted for genocide. She also said a treaty with Indigenous Australians must be central in any move towards a republic. She said First Nations Australians should play a key role in rewriting the Constitution, and a charter or rights should be established to enshrine the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's unfinished business that we need to resolve before this country can become a republic, Senator Thorpe said. This must happen through treaty. We can move towards a treaty republic now. The two processes are not opposed, they're complementary. As First Peoples, we never ceded our sovereignty over this land. The Crown invaded this country, has not sought treaty with First Peoples, and committed a genocide of our people. King Charles is not the legitimate sovereign of these lands.
On your left, Dusty.
Okay, stay here.